Hi, everyone. I'm Anya Parampil, and this is Red Lines. My guest today is Rania Khalek. You know her from Soapbox. She's also co-host of the podcast Left Bitches Who Are Right. You know her, obviously, if you're a follower of the Grayzone. Nice to talk to you, Rania. It's been a while since I feel like it's definitely been a while since we've done a Rania and Anya show, but the impeachment drama was just too hard to resist.
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple weeks, like watching a weird soap opera with really ugly people.
And you've been doing this, you've been tuning in from Lebanon. I don't know why you want to subject yourself to this. But before we get into hearing some specific clips from the impeachment trial, I just wanted to get your general take on the whole drama. Is this the best use of the Democrats' time right now? It's just odd to me that we're, again, in the middle of this pandemic. There was so much hype around finally getting Biden in office, and we've had a month of Democrat rule, and this has been the focus.
Yeah, it's actually really jarring to watch, especially from abroad, because a lot of the news that you hear about America is interestingly not impeachment centered. It's mostly centered on the COVID crisis in America. And on the fact that it's so widespread there. I mean, there's 15 million people who've lost their health insurance because of the financial ruin they're experiencing from the economic troubles from the COVID crisis. You have 50 million Americans facing hunger. You have, extreme. I mean, you've got this like growing wealth gap. You've got so much. You have so much suffering taking place right now across the country. People are desperate. They've lost their jobs. You have 40 million people facing eviction. They're in desperate need of relief. And the Democrats came into office promising immediate $2,000 checks. They right away backtrack on that. And then now they're not even talking about it anymore. Everything's about impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. And it really is just this disconnected, weird spectacle of all these members of Congress getting together. And of course, Democrats on one side making their case, Republicans making their case. And I have to say, watching it, obviously, I'm not sympathetic to what happened on January 6th. It was pretty, horrible to watch. It was something very negative that took place. It was a violent riot. That said, they know they're not going to win this. So what's the purpose of dragging the country into this political drama of theirs while so many people are suffering? And, their case isn't even that strong. Like, they're making a very strong emotional case. It's kind of like this sort of emotional manipulation that all Democrats seem to be engaged in from all ends of the Democratic spectrum, relying heavily on emotion, even crying in their, in the speeches they're giving and the testimony they're giving, and then just making really annoying, obnoxious comments about American arrogance and American exceptionalism and how, Trump ruined our image. And then you have Republicans on the other end. They started out pretty weak in the beginning of the trial, and everybody made fun of that. They've actually put forth a pretty solid defense, I think, really on the grounds of free speech. And, trying to demonstrate that, or trying to show that Democrats have not demonstrated that Trump legally, by like legal definition, by legal precedent, incited a riot. And I actually think it's kind of dangerous what Democrats are trying to do on free speech grounds. We can go into that a little bit more later, but I think it's kind of dangerous because if you watch the Republicans, if you watch Trump's lawyers make their case, they actually showed a montage of Democrats holding rallies, speaking to large crowds of people, telling them to go fight, using the kind of rhetoric that we hear from political leaders at rallies. And what they pretty much showed is that you can kind of accuse anyone of inciting a riot if the basis for that is just saying to go fight. But that's like a free speech issue, and it's like a legal issue. But I do think that Republicans actually put forth a pretty good argument, and ultimately it doesn't even matter because Democrats already know they're not going to have the votes to impeach him. So it's a waste of everyone's time, and for what? So Democrats can have some sort of symbolic victory. Well, average people in the country continue to suffer, and it's not going to win the Democrats any it's not going to win them anything positive in the long run, because people are just going to remember that Democrats spent their time in some political drama instead of helping people.
Yeah, we'll pick up on what you said definitely about the dangers regarding the free speech argument Democrats are making right now. But I wanted to emphasize another point you made, which is that the Democrats have really been making an emotional case. There was even a special session overseen by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which was just members of Congress recounting their experience on January 6th. I wanted to play some of the things they had to say.
And I apologized, and I told my daughter Tabitha, who's 24 and a brilliant algebra teacher in Teach for America. Now, I told her how sorry I was, and I promised her that it would not be like this again the next time she came back to the Capitol with me. And you know what she said? She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol."
So I'm here tonight to say to my brothers and sisters in Congress and all around our country, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For I had never understood, really understood, what privilege really means. It took a violent mob of insurrectionists and a lightning bolt moment in this very room. But now I know. Believe me, I really know.
I asked her to go last because I get because this is so personal.
So, Rania, I'm playing those sound bites not to mock someone like Rashida Tlaib, who did receive real death threats during her time working on the Hill, but she wasn't even there on January 6th. And so this seemed more to just be a Democratic strategy, get the waterworks going and get people fired up.
Yeah, it looked like, honestly, a very disconnected therapy session. That was very self-involved. I get it. Like, if I had been there that day, I would have probably been very scared as well. I'm not denying that people experience trauma, or feel very sad about it or want to cry about it. But that said, it's just like people have other things going on in their lives. Again, the country is suffering dramatically right now. Like, there's all kinds of trauma being experienced at the moment. And so to focus so much on like personal feelings like that just feels, again, disconnected, but also it's, just from a strategic standpoint, I actually think it's unwise. It might in the moment seem like Democrats are like rallying their side to their cause or something by behaving this way, but they're just weaponizing emotion. And that could easily be used and turned around against them. And it raises the question of what they're weaponizing this emotion for. And that remains unclear to me, because there seem to be a few different agendas taking place. In the AOC's case, she's partly politicizing this to seemingly want to, encourage more censorship. That seems really wrong to me. And then you have, other members of Congress trying to politicize this because they want a bolder domestic war on terror, something that we should also be wary of considering how the last war on terror went. So it seems disconnected, and also just it feels unsettling to me, because it seems like the road this leads to, what they're using this for, is not, something positive and something that's going to benefit people. It's something that could actually ultimately be quite dangerous to civil liberties, and just completely distract from, the actual problems taking place in the country. And what I find really, really jarring watching the kind of drama on display is how everyone's so concerned about what happened on January 6th, yet no one's discussing how to prevent it. No one's discussing how to prevent the rise of the far right. No one's discussing the fact that, we saw the Washington Post, not a pro-Trump outlet, came out with this article showing that a lot of the people who've been arrested for participating in that riot had experienced financial hardship very recently.
Yeah, that they had higher levels of debt than the national average, even in some cases.
Right. And why are we not talking about this? And then, you had Ilhan Omar, and I don't even know why she did this, considering the kinds of economic policies she supports, which are quite progressive. But you had her tweeting in response to that Washington Post article, something I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of, it's not economic anxiety, like it's hatred or it's racism or whatever, trying to sort of collapse what's happening down into this very shallow analysis of just racism and hatred, when we know historically that economic anxiety fuels the far right. It makes people more susceptible to far right narratives. And in America, far right narratives have a massive platform. Why aren't we talking about that? If you really care about the rise of domestic extremism, you should be wanting to prevent it. You should be wanting to reverse it. And the way you do that is you look at what's causing it, and you address those issues. You address those material concerns. That's literally all you can do. And instead of talking about that, we're watching this weird spectacle play out. It just seems completely bonkers.
And rather than focus simply on Trump and whether or not he incited a riot, getting down into this nitty-gritty argument about language, which is difficult to prove, I don't get why the conversation isn't geared toward investigating the security failures which led to the people on January 6th getting inside of Congress. Why is our anger not directed at the FBI? We're now hearing about how some of the major groups involved, including the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, were essentially led by FBI informants. We know that they were planning all of this openly online. So why is that not what's stressed here? Why aren't we asking where was the intelligence around January 6th?
I mean, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about that. One of your highest level, is it the leader of the Proud Boys, if I'm not mistaken? The actual leader turns out to have been a high-level FBI informant. You got to ask yourself questions.
Arrested the day before. He was arrested the day before, so he couldn't be present, of course, but he'd riled everyone up to get there.
I mean, there remains I don't know why that's not a central issue here. Like, it seems like Democrats don't actually want to find out why things went wrong. They'd much rather just like have their little pity party where they cry. I can't answer. I don't know, but there are a lot of questions to be asked about what happened on January 6th. I mean, you and I both know that Washington, D.C. is one of the most heavily fortified cities, if not the most heavily fortified city in the world. It's like prepared for it's prepared in several ways, in every way imaginable, for any kind of like apocalyptic scenario, terrorist attack, whatever it may be, in order to be able to protect the most powerful people in the country who rule from there. So the fact that these people were able to get this close to the Capitol, of course, and you have all these informants involved, you have people openly planning it. Like, we need to ask, why are our policing and intelligence agencies they haven't been. We know that for over a decade or 2 decades, they have not been taking seriously at all the danger posed by the far right. Why? We never talk about that. But the answer to that, of course, is not to, ramp up policing. The answer to that is not to give the authorities more power than they already have. I mean, at this point, authorities in America have enough power to put us all in prison for thinking the wrong things because of how much power they gained after the war on terror. So that's why I worry about the way all of this is also getting framed, because even when it is discussed, there are some Democrats that do want to talk about these things, but when they do talk about them, it's always in this framing of how do we police more? How do we surveil more? And I don't think that's the answer. Again, we have to look at the root causes of far-right extremism. I mean, far-right extremism has been on the rise since on the rise, like a huge rise, experienced a huge boom after the election of Obama back in 2008, which coincided with a huge financial collapse that destroyed a lot of people's livelihoods. That's not a coincidence. Why aren't we talking about that? And the fact that this happened after a year of COVID destroying the economy and making everybody feel unstable and insecure. I mean, it's like these should be the questions at the forefront. If you really care about preventing QAnon from growing, and if you really care about preventing another riot on the Capitol, You need to be asking these questions. And instead we're watching Jamie Raskin and Rashida Tlaib cry. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and engage in this political theater rather than, as you say, talk about passing COVID relief checks. When you have even Senator Bernie Sanders defending the decision to reduce the amount of money. We were promised $2,000, and he recently said in an interview, yeah, $2,000, that's $1,400 plus the $600 you already received. If that's what we're getting from Sanders.
And what we have promised the American people, we've said two things in the last month. We said we're going to get you $2,000, and that's $600 plus $1,400.
It's just, I think we live in a really pathetic political situation.
Pathetic,
Rania.
and honestly, it's shocking to me what people are willing to put up with. Like, especially the left in America. I mean, whatever that means, it's a stupid umbrella term that doesn't really have much meaning. But for whatever exists of the left in America, it's like they're still caught in some world where they're just like applauding Bernie Sanders all the time.
Yeah.
Like there is no even policy.
5 years ago, he said that Henry Kissinger was bad.
I mean, come on, guys. Like, what? It's like they're falling for stupid symbolic stuff too. Like, it doesn't. I honestly, I look around, and there seem to be so few voices and outlets actually talking about things that are really happening. Everything is just like cheerleading for the squad or cheerleading for Bernie Sanders or fighting over, like this person criticized the DSA. And all the while, what you have on the other side is an extremely well-organized right that's getting stronger.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I don't think I've ever felt this hopeless. I hate to say that, but hopeless about the ability of the left to do anything in America. I mean, even now, sorry to go off on a little bit of a tangent, but you have all these progressive leaders and organizations and progressives in Congress who are fawning all over Joe Biden for passing, for signing these really symbolic executive orders that don't actually change anything, all because he's giving them a seat at the table symbolically by having his staff reach out to them. So like you see all these articles in Politico where these, progressives in Congress and these progressive leaders of progressive organizations are actually saying that they're taming their criticism and they're going to wait and see. Because for the first time in decades, Democrats are actually calling them and asking them what they think.
Oh my gosh.
Like, this seems like a time, this is a time when you need to be pressuring all you have and all you can to force the most leftist policies imaginable. Because you know what? Lobbyists aren't sitting to wait and see. Weapons companies aren't sitting to wait and see what Biden does. The health insurance industry isn't waiting to see. So why on earth are progressives waiting to see just because they feel like they have a little bit of power because Biden's like staffer called them up to ask them what they think? Like, that's where we're at. It's depressing.
Yeah, Rania, I agree that there was immediately after the election of Biden, or the inauguration, basically since the new year, since January 2021, there was this shift on the so-called left. And it first came out with Force the Vote, where there were suddenly people who, rather than go balls to the wall for something as basic as Medicare for all, were spending their time attacking Jimmy Dore and defending AOC and defending people in power who were refusing to do anything for working people, rather than push for the issues that I thought we all just basically cared about. I mean, Force the Vote it really shocked me, honestly, how many people were willing to side with power over people there. And then it seemed like after January 6th and everything that happened with AOC, now you just can't criticize her at all. It's like it shut down the conversation that was already just starting up.
Well, now if you criticize
it's
her,
violent.
Anya, yeah, exactly. It's violence, and you're like calling into question her lived experience or some stupid crap like that, pretending she's this like damsel, this victim, as opposed to a member of one of the most powerful bodies in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, she has a seat in one of the most powerful bodies in the world, and we're acting like she's the victim. I mean, it's just, and the Force the Vote stuff, it just really exposed that at least half of what we call the left media in America is actually just running cover for the Democratic Party at the end of the day. They're making sure that third parties cannot start, flourish, or thrive. And they're making certain that anybody who challenges progressive Democrats is like immediately made an example of through like these kind of smears and this sort of libel. The last month has been really eye-opening, and it's also just like there's like a certain toxic element on the left that isn't really left. And I don't know why we pretend these people are left and like look to them for anything. Like it's like they're Democrats. At the end of the day, they're Democrats. They're on Team Democrat. And we know that leads to a dead end. So like I don't even know why we're having this argument anymore. It's just sad.
Yeah. Well, during the impeachment, one of the most entertaining moments for me was watching certain Democrats melt down over the damage January 6th did to the image of the United States as a beacon of democracy. Let's hear from Representative Joaquin Castro specifically.
Our adversaries are even using the events of January 6th not only to denigrate America, but to justify their own anti-democratic behavior, calling America hypocritical. Here's what the Chinese government is saying. The spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the Capitol riot should spark, quote, deep reflection among U.S. lawmakers regarding how they discuss the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, suggesting that the U.S. is hypocritical in denouncing Beijing's crackdown in the city while it struggles with its own unrest at home. The chairman of the Russian Upper House of Parliament's International Affairs Committee said, quote, the celebration of democracy is over. This is, alas, actually the bottom. I say this without a hint of gloating. America is no longer charting the course and therefore has lost all its rights to set it, and especially to impose it on others. The Supreme Leader is using President Trump's incitement of insurrection to mock America. He said of the situation in the United States, quote, this is their democracy and human rights. This is their election scandal. These are their values. These values are being mocked by the whole world. Even their friends are laughing at them. And these statements are serious and pervasive.
All right, Rania, should we just be glad that he read all of that into the public record?
Yeah, it's actually pretty impressive. He gave such a big platform to statements that I mean, like, tell me where the lie is. Like all those statements were right on point. I don't know. I don't know why we're supposed to be upset about that. I guess if I was like an American, if I was like Team America, Captain America, I'd be like upset that other people saw the reality of what we are. But that's what those statements were. They're the reality of what America is. And it does make a mockery of democracy. Like the level of arrogance on display from Joaquin Castro and other members of Congress who made similar points because they repeatedly brought up Russia and China. And even suggested like, oh, Russia could have infiltrated the insurrection.
They were going to sell Nancy Pelosi's laptop to Russia. This was actually a story that he brought up in his speech.
Yeah, it's pathetic. But I mean, what this really shows is like the fact that, you know, the U.S. is definitely being made fun of around the world. And for these kinds of like this sort of like liberal empire, you know, believer like Joaquin Castro, it's devastating because America does go around the world talking about democracy, this, human rights, that. We're the leader of the free world, even though nobody elected America the leader of the free world. We're like the dictator of the world. We just believe that we have that right.
We're the Juan Guaido, self-declared.
We're the one, yeah, exactly. We're the Juan Guaido of the world, self-declared leader. But it's, I mean, it is, for people like that, it is embarrassing. I get why they're embarrassed, and they should be, because it does definitely make it more difficult for America to go around acting like it's the center of world stability when it can't even, you know, keep a handle on its own crazies. But beyond that, I think what's interesting too is that he was so offended by the Chinese making the parallel to the rioters in Hong Kong, which is actually very apt. I mean, you guys at the Grayzone know this better than anyone else. So you've done some really excellent reporting exposing the Hong Kong rioters as like this right-wing US-backed group trying to destabilize China. And it just shows the hypocrisy, right? Because like we were talking earlier about, AOC and Rashida Tlaib and, Raskin crying. And it's like, have these people taken even a second to reflect on the horrors that US-backed psychotic right-wing groups around the world impose on the parliaments and capitals of other countries, and the terror that the lawmakers in those countries feel at the hands of, for example, the people who murdered Gaddafi with the help of NATO air cover, and then Hillary Clinton laughed about it, or like the Nazis that America is arming in Ukraine, or the jihadists that the US armed and funded in Syria that repeatedly attacked government buildings and killed police and killed lawmakers across Syria. Like in Venezuela, the US tries to do the same thing in Venezuela, though they haven't been as successful. Or, funding these fascistic right-wing elements to try and overthrow a democratically elected government, and trying to attack people who are just like AOC and just like Rashida Tlaib, but with way better politics. But the point is that like these people haven't even taken a moment to reflect on that, because they don't even think twice about that. The US, and I know people keep calling it a straw man to talk about this, but I don't think it is. I think it's very important to acknowledge and recognize that the US funds and participates in and backs violent coups by violent rioters around the world and inflicts this kind of violence on people all the time. All the time. It doesn't make it okay what happened on January 6th, but January 6th was like nowhere near compared to as violent it was what the US does. January 6th was like soft and pleasant compared to the sort of violence the US inflicts. And there should be at least some reflecting on that. And that's what China was trying to say in that statement about Hong Kong. And for Joaquin Castro to just, shove that statement aside as if it's just propaganda and means nothing, shows that, these people are complete hypocrites. And like, it's hard for me to feel bad for you when you can't even like recognize that you're literally supporting what you feared was going to happen to you, but didn't happen to you. You were literally supporting that in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, give us some perspective, Rania, since you are in Lebanon, you were there on January 6th. How did people around you and in that part of the world respond to the images that we saw?
They were laughing. Like they weren't crying because of American leadership. They were laughing at the US. Like that's what they always do when something bad happens in America. I mean, it's not like they want everyone in America to suffer, but America is this like big bully that just runs around like dominating and, kicking people in the face if they don't listen. And so when you're in a country that gets kicked in the face, and you see the person kicking you in the face, like having this like sort of spectacle of trouble taking place, you think it's funny. And so, yeah, these liberals are right. People are laughing at America, but America deserves it. Like it's like you can't help but laugh at this situation because it's just so absurd. And the hypocrisy is just so, I don't even know. I don't have the words for it. The hypocrisy is just like too much. It's like a level of, I don't know. Like it's like, what do you say to that? What do you say? How are people supposed to react when they see the country that inflicts this on other countries get a little bit of taste of their own medicine?
Yeah, and then spend the next month talking about it and crying about it instead of trying to provide any relief for its suffering population. It's interesting that you say the international media you've seen hasn't been focused on impeachment, but has been focused on the crisis in the United States currently with the economy, with the health, with the pandemic, the collapsing healthcare system. And yet we're not hearing about that as much as we're hearing about impeachment here in the US. Rania, the impeachment trial has focused on an argument regarding free speech, specifically that the president and elected officials should be held to a higher standard when it comes to their speech, that they can actually be held accountable in a way that private citizens can't. Representative Jamie Raskin specifically made this argument and used a teacher to illustrate his point.
Everyone should be clear. There's nothing remotely exotic about what we're saying. It should be common sense to everybody. Common sense about this understanding of the First Amendment as it applies to public servants, cops, firefighters, teachers, everybody across the land. My daughter, who I mentioned earlier in the trial, she's a teacher in a public school. The courts have said teachers teach, but if they go off script and they start advocating totalitarianism, treason, or what have you, they're not living up to the duties of their office as teacher, they can be fired. Everybody knows that.
Rania, there he's talking about teachers, but he goes on to say that public officials also can't advocate for totalitarianism, and that's not protected speech. I mean, especially when he's talking about teachers there, but you can apply it to elected officials as well. Does that argument not have a very slippery slope for the left?
Yeah, 100%. First of all, he said in that argument that a teacher can be fired, which is different from being prosecuted. So his argument has a hole in it just on that basis. But absolutely, because who defines what totalitarianism is, right? Like he talks about a teacher going off script. Have you seen what teachers are supposed to teach in the US? Does that mean if a teacher goes off script and starts teaching like Howard Zinn or Noam Chomsky or Michael Parenti or socialist revolutionaries? If a teacher starts teaching about socialist revolutionaries, if they start teaching about Fred Hampton, does that mean that teacher can be fired and prosecuted? Because that's the slippery slope we're going down. And I think that's a slippery slope for this entire argument, because what the Democrats have failed to show is Donald Trump explicitly inciting a riot. I mean, yeah, Donald Trump with his behavior did lead to a riot happening. He did kind of incite a riot. But as far as legal precedent goes, he did not explicitly tell people to go riot, and he did not explicitly tell people to go be violent. And that's why so far Democrats have been unable to show that. And that's why they're relying so much on this sort of emotional manipulation. But they really are going down a slippery slope because it can be used against them too. Have you seen their rallies? They tell people to go fight. Have you seen, and forget Democrats for a second. I've heard some people on the left making the argument for this, but they should be the last ones making this argument. I mean, have you been to a leftist rally? Like, that literally opens the door for all of our friends who lead marches to be imprisoned for inciting a riot, if anything goes south. Like, has history not proven the majority of cases where, before the civil rights movement, when free speech there really was like no.
He was acquitted?
What? What? Trump was acquitted?
He was just acquitted.
So all this, and Trump was acquitted, and they knew that was going to happen. They wasted all of our time for it feels like it's been a month. I know it's only been like a week and a half, but they wasted all of our time when there's pressing issues taking place, knowing this wasn't going to pass, knowing they weren't going to be able to impeach him. And for what? Why did you waste my time for a week doing this when people can't find vaccines? Like, my family in the U.S. can't find a vaccine.
It's almost like they don't want to pass any. They don't want to get. Look how badly it was going for them about Medicare for all. I mean, they were getting heat from. AOC was forced to respond to Jimmy Dore because it became such a massive swell of support for Medicare for all. And I think we would have continued down that direction if they hadn't come up with this impeachment drama. And on the point, Rania, of how dangerous this is for the left, I think it's directly related to force the vote, because before any of this happened on January 26th, I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be cool if someone such as AOC or Bernie Sanders, somebody actually in government, called on the people of this country to come to Congress and occupy the Capitol, demand a vote on Medicare for all, and say, look, this is your place, this is your house. I'm fighting against my own party to try and get something like Medicare for all through. So I need you, the people, to come and show that this is what the country needs and this is what the country wants. But now it seems like something like that would just be attacked, and perhaps the member of Congress would be impeached or prosecuted for calling for that kind of protest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Look at all the, have you been to a Bernie Sanders, or I haven't been to a Bernie Sanders rally. I've seen Bernie Sanders speaking on a video at his rallies. He's using the same rhetoric. That's what people who, lead rallies do. And obviously, like, they'll argue that the difference is that, well, Democrats aren't rioting, Trump's crowd was. But like, that doesn't really matter when it comes down to the speech issue. And this goes into a broader issue of, since January 6th happened, the desire for censorship has increased dramatically, right? Like, it's actually concerning to me. It's being encouraged by members of Congress. Liberals have become complete authoritarians. They literally want to take anybody who disagrees with them off the internet. They want them taken off Twitter, taken off Facebook, taken off Instagram. And there's leftists who are behind this because they see it as shutting down fascists. But the evidence shows that the opposite is happening. It's the left who's being targeted. It's the left that's being demonetized on YouTube. It's the left that's being taken off of Twitter. And yeah, Trump isn't on Twitter anymore. But you know what's really scary is that a bunch of tech oligarchs have been able to silence, literally disappear, a figure as loud and obnoxious and powerful as Donald Trump. He was a president. And they've been able to silence him. And I don't really care if Trump is silenced. It's about the precedent it sets. Because if they can silence Trump, they can literally remove us, all of us. They can move the Grayzone. They can take off the Grayzone. They can take Soapbox. They can take all left voices. They can literally just remove us. They can erase us offline arbitrarily. And it's like we don't exist anymore.
It is like he doesn't exist anymore. And that's what's so bizarre after 4 years of them ramming coverage of him down our throats. It's like he's completely disappeared. And yet, again, they spent the first month of the Biden administration talking about nothing other than Trump. It's really absurd.
And it's like they've really showed how they're so obsessed with this kind of tabloid politics, because Trump made the corporate media so much money, right? Like their ratings have dropped since he stopped being president and since he stopped being able to tweet. And so they've been desperately searching for another tabloid kind of figure. And they tried to do it for a couple weeks with Marjorie Taylor Greene. They tried to cover her nonstop. It didn't really work or stick. Nobody cared. She didn't give them the ratings that they wanted. But it almost shows you, like, because of the way that the corporate media is set up, it's just all about profits and ratings, that, if there is going to be another demagogue that comes along, it'll be because of them. It'll be because they give them a platform. They build them up. They give them all the attention. They love it. They miss Trump and they want another one. And so, like, they're actually a part of the problem. They're a part of the reason why we had January 6th.
Yeah, they gave us Trump. There's a reason we ended up with a reality TV show host as president of the entire country. And I'm just disturbed now that you have Trump lawyers making the argument against what they called constitutional cancel culture, or the way that you could just target any political figure for inciting a riot if they use the language like, you got to fight hard. It's why is that left to the Republicans now, Rania? I don't know. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts before we wrap.
The Democrats wasted our time for a week when the country is really suffering and people need help. And they're not going to forget that. Like, if my life is crumbling around me, I don't care about some impeachment hearing. I care about help. And it's like, if the people in power aren't helping me, what does that mean for the next election? So this party is extremely stupid. It has no sense of self-preservation or long-term goals. And it's clearly a dead end. And the way that the squad has just fallen in line shows what a dead end the Democrats are. We need to stop working inside of it. And I don't know what better example there is for why than the kind of dramatic soap opera we witnessed over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I'll be watching in the coming weeks and months of the Biden administration. How is the squad going to apologize for his failures, for his inability to deliver on a progressive agenda? And then who in so-called progressive media is going to jump to defend again
we know.
politicians.
I think we know.
Yep. So that's the big question for me, and I think average people too, because everybody's fed up with this party and everybody's fed up with their apologists. So, Rania Khalek, we always will catch your soapbox segments, I'm sure, mocking all of these people. And we'll laugh and appreciate them. So thank you. And thank you for speaking with me today.
Thanks, Anya.